The name Jaap Schröder lives among those musical pioneers of the second half of the 20th century who tirelessly and with great enthusiasm promoted the study of early music and its performance practice. Schröder himself, as a young musician, had difficulty deciding whether to become a musicologist or violinist. In the end, he combined both, especially as he made the transition from modern musical practice to historically informed performance in the 1960s. Throughout his career, Schröder immersed himself in performing, teaching, recording, and unearthing musical gems that were relatively or completely unknown from the era of early music into the beginning of the 19th century. Schröder, in his biographical sketch that he wrote for the Smithsonian Chamber Music Society, estimated that he had made approximately 150 recordings up to that point. That number increases to some degree considering the recording projects that took place after his estimation, as well as the numerous live and private recordings that were made of his concerts and special projects, especially at Yale University, where he served as guest faculty. The Yale collection of historical sound recordings includes all known commercial releases by Schröder and now seeks to collect and preserve as many rare non-commercial or limited release recordings as possible, some of which are featured in this presentation and are being heard outside Yale for the first time. On a personal note, Jaap Schröder was an important performance practice mentor to me, who also became a treasured friend. In honor of our friendship, I will refer to him by his first name from this point forward. When in 1984 and 1985, Jaap recorded the sonatas and partitas for solo violin by J.S. Bach, most collegiate-level music students, at least in the United States, had feelings toward Baroque performance practice that ranged from ambivalence to outright abhorrence. Jaap's recording, however, as it was eventually released by the Smithsonian Institution, did a great deal to change those feelings. For some, it would be the first time these works, as performed on Baroque violin, were being given a serious and well-considered listening by modern-era musicians. Several students at Yale in the early 1990s would remark about the expressive elegance of Jaap's interpretation, the ornamental grace of his phrasing, and the need to make sure these works, when they played them, were not being used merely as Baroque solo etudes. As a result, many Yale music students, graduate and undergraduate alike, took advantage of coaching privately with Jaap when he was on campus. In 2007, Yale University Press published Jaap's book entitled Bach's Solo Works, A Performer's Guide, which was a companion to the recording and essentially a musical treatise that expressed his interpretational and technical approach to these works. Although students of Baroque violin playing often find the book helpful and informative, Jaap's intention mostly was to invite modern-era violinists into the stylistic conscience of Baroque performance practice through specific examples of technique and musical consideration. We will now listen to a couple audio excerpts from Jaap's recording, starting with a sarabande from the partita in D minor, followed by the Allegro assai from the sonata in C major. Jaap's musical interests by no means ceased in 1750 or even at the end of the 18th century. He would use period instruments in performance practice also to perform, teach, and record works by Beethoven, Schubert, and Mendelssohn, among others. And while the vast majority of those efforts involved performing on violin, Jaap also played viola from time to time. The next excerpt is from a rare LP recording of Jaap on period viola, joined by his longtime friend Anner Bilsma on cello. Jaap's first musical love was the string quartet, and it remained so throughout his career. He was an active member of the Netherlands String Quartet, and subsequently, as a period violinist, he led the Esterhazy, Smithson, and Schaholt quartets. That love extended into other chamber music configurations and ensembles as well. Notably, Jaap served as the concertmaster for the Academy of Ancient Music's recordings of the complete Mozart symphonies with Christopher Hogwood as conductor, and he recorded many violin sonatas by composers such as Mozart, Schubert, and Mendelssohn with various prominent forte pianists. In the early 1970s, under the encouragement of his good friend, harpsichordist Albert Fuller, Jaap helped establish the Aston Magna Early Music Festival, where he frequently performed alongside fellow Baroque violinist and pedagogue Stanley Ritchie. His presence in the United States became more frequent as he also began working with Ken Slowick at the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C. It was during these initial U.S. visits that he also founded the Atlantis Ensemble, initially a piano trio that later expanded for various projects. Jaap made recordings with the ensemble throughout his career, many of which are commercially available. We have the opportunity now, however, to listen to two excerpts from a live performance early on, captured on cassette tape and donated to the Yale collection by Lawrence Libin in Jaap's memory. As an extension of his frequent travels to the United States, Jaap was active as a visiting faculty member at the Yale School of Music during the 1980s and 90s. He generally made 4 appearances at Yale per year for 2 weeks at a time. Though period performance practice was an extracurricular activity at best, numerous students would seek out Jaap's wisdom, scholarship, and guidance through coaching sessions. His convictions regarding period instruments and the techniques used to play them was unwavering, but his manner toward the students was especially patient, inviting, and generous, making the most of the opportunity to open the door to historically informed style. Since Jaap removed all sense of judgment from his work with the students, they tended to be more receptive toward his guidance. Often they noted how his teaching led to a clearer sense of musical architecture, transparent sound, cleaner articulations, and a better and deeper understanding of ornamentation. His willingness to demonstrate and play along with his students reinforced his instructions, even while the students were doing their best with a modern setup. One stylistic principle he imparted in a particularly memorable way was that the Baroque violin was not meant as much to sing as to speak in an elevated and deeply meaningful way through all kinds of wonderful thoughts and expressions enabled by the bow. He would then demonstrate some of those articulations and try them out with the students. Jaap's Yale activities also included guest teaching various seminars and classes. Organist Bruce Barber recounts the following from when he was a Yale student. Quote, I worked with Herr Schröder while a grad student at Yale as he worked with the organ classes. He would come to our seminar in Dwight Chapel and perform while we had to dance to his playing. He was the first Baroque violinist I ever encountered in the flesh. As an organist, it was an eye-opener. As a choral conductor, it was ear-opening. As a cellist, it was so very affirming. Unquote. Soprano Rebecca Langhurst, while pursuing graduate studies at Yale and through the opera program, also recounts, quote, It was wonderful to work with him. I did so in many different venues, including one of my recitals. I sang Let the Bright Seraphim, and he worked with me and the wonderful instrumentalists in my string quartet. Unquote. The next excerpt in this presentation features Jaap in recital as part of the Yale Faculty Artist Series. The concert was given on October 29, 1995 in Sprague Hall, and the excerpt is the opening of the Passacaglia from Bieber's Rosary Sonata No. 16. During his time on the Yale faculty, Jaap also coached and performed with a student ensemble of the Yale School of Music known as the Yale Chamber Players. The repertoire he chose ranged from 17th century music to Mendelssohn's Italian Symphony. On these occasions, Jaap's sense of stylistic conscience needed to be conveyed and actualized with an ensemble of students who had little or no experience in period performance practice. Also, at the time, inexpensive period bows or starter Baroque instruments were not readily available. Therefore, the students played on their own modern instruments at A440, but nevertheless did what they could under Jaap's guidance to achieve a different kind of sound and approach to ensemble interpretation. Jaap's method was to peel away certain layers of presumed musical style one by one, to the point where the students could discover new forms of historical expression in a more forthright manner. This included lightness of articulation, putting aside a constant vibrato, applying lift according to the phrasing, and so on. Jaap, of course, understood what it was like to go through this process, since he started his career on modern violin. Jaap also used imagery and storytelling to help evoke the sound and style of period performance. While rehearsing Schmelzer's famous Lament on the Death of Ferdinand III, Jaap eloquently and captivatingly explained, in his mind, that the opening of the piece represented the sorrow of the mourners, who then were called in procession to the funeral by the pealing of the church bells, followed by the congregational singing of a hymn dedicated to the memory of Ferdinand, and finally ending in fond recollections of a great man. The following excerpt is taken from the opening of that piece, performed by Jaap and the Yale Chamber Players on October 30th, 1993. Jaap was active as a fellow at Yale's Davenport College following his years on the School of Music faculty. He generally came to Yale twice a year to give concerts in the Davenport College Common Room and open his schedule to student coachings. These appearances were part of remarkably active visits to the United States that often included cross-country travel for numerous rehearsals, performances, and recording sessions. It is even more impressive to consider that Jaap was in his late 70s and early to mid-80s during this period of his career, showing no signs of slowing down. The Davenport College concerts were quintessential forums in an intimate musical setting for Jaap to explore, explain, and perform solo violin repertoire, all of which he shared enthusiastically with those in attendance. Jaap introduced each piece through explanations that were informative and in-depth, never simplistic or condescending, while remaining accessible to non-musicians as well as those who were more musically informed. Davenport fellow Raleigh D'Adamo recently donated to Yale several cassette tapes of these concerts recorded with Jaap's permission on a portable recorder. In the following two clips from November 8th, 2006, when Jaap was 81 years old, we hear him introduce an air by 17th century composer, violinist, and guitarist Nicolas Matthijs, followed by the opening of the piece itself.
The third composer now, which I present to you, in the past maybe I have played a movement for violin solo, this Nicolas Matthijs. He was an Italian from Naples and moved to London. London was very welcomed the foreign Italian and German virtuosi, and they had very much success. Thomas Balzer from northern Germany, Matthijs from Italy, they had great success in London and were very much in demand also as teachers. Now, Nicolas Matthijs was indeed a very good composer also, and not only violinist but also a guitar player. He wrote a tutor for the guitar, and which is Friese, of course, so the guitar players certainly know about this. In England, he printed a number of airs for the violin, and the date on that is 1673. So we are now getting to the second half. And these airs for the violin are basically for one violin with continuo. It could be harpsichord, but it could also be guitar. And sometimes he wrote a second violin part later to add to the one violin. So these pieces sometimes have an extra violin part written later in addition.
Numerous commercial audio recordings by Jaap are readily accessible through various streaming platforms, but video footage of him is practically non-existent. This extremely rare clip is from a Davenport College performance of music by the Haydn family, assisted by harpsichordist Margaret Irwin Brandon. It was during this performance that Jaap mentioned what he considered to be the main difference between Haydn and Mozart. He said, quote, "While Haydn is of the earth and so well grounded, Mozart takes to flight," unquote. Jaap was 84 years old at the time this video was taken. Even at the age of 87, Jaap remained busy and active. In 2012, he brought the Schahold Quartet with him to the United States in his usual role as first violinist and leader. At Yale, through the co-sponsorship of Davenport College, they collaborated with the American Baroque Orchestra in a concert of music performed by the quartet, followed by J.S. Bach's Third Brandenburg Concerto. This final clip of the presentation is an excerpt from that concert of the quartet performing part of Purcell's Pavane and Chaconne in G minor. Jaap eventually announced his intentions to retire from performance at the age of 90. Reaching that milestone is also when his visits to Yale came to an end. One thing he especially enjoyed in his final years of travel was visiting the Yale collection of historical sound recordings and listening to 78s of chamber music, especially by early 20th century musicians that he respected and enjoyed. He thought that in certain ways their playing also preserved a sense of stylistic conscience that was often missing from modern performance practice. And while visiting the collection, he would generously donate some of his latest CDs. As memory inevitably fades after Jaap's death in 2020 at the age of 94, his rare live recordings especially helped to preserve a comprehensive sense of his insatiable and enthusiastic desire always to explore and share his love of music with anyone willing to engage. The Yale collection will continue to seek out and preserve such recordings so that generations to come may be equally enriched by the pioneers of the past. Thank you.